So the glass that we're working with is coming out of our furnace about 2100 degrees. It's about the same temperature as molten lava. It's pretty incredible how hot that massive glass is. However, on the top screen we have a diagram just to kind of clear up how the furnace works. It's a round barrel or a ceramic crucible sitting behind the door, and we're melting hot molten glass. The studio has two 1,000-pound furnaces, which is incredible. I mean, most studios have one 500-pound furnace, and then even the biggest studios just have 1,000-pound furnace, but not here. This is one of the highest levels around the United States, so we have 2,000-pound furnaces. We can see our featured artist, Brandyn, down here, pulling hot glass out of that furnace. It's hard to believe, but that small, massive glass can eventually become what we have on the right-hand side. Nearly all glass throughout history started and looked exactly the same. The starting point's always the same, gathering hot glass, balling it up onto the very end, and then manipulating that mass. The featured artists that we have here are really here to experiment. Their work is not found in our gallery. Hopefully later on, if everything's a success, we'll have them back here. We'll have some of their artwork out in our gallery. What you're seeing here is not seen before. I mean, just a lot of experimenting and really kind of driving that focus home. It's never really been done. And it's just unique. I mean, after all, this museum is here just to push the limits of artwork, glass, and it happens to be that, 3D technology is something that's relatively new in the market. It's not really something you can't really buy for personal use, but Phirak has. He bought one for himself personally, and then just continuing that demonstration and also just learning a lot. Phirak's been doing this. He was one of the first ones to teach 3D printed with glass class at Pilchuck Glass School, if not the first one ever. It's just a unique process and a unique place to be at right now in this industry when you're fusing two completely different things that will usually never work together, and yet finding out some way of ensuring that both mediums are happy and they don't break or crack. Even after all the pieces that we put away here today, we won't truly know if it was a success until tomorrow when we pull them out and see if there might be a crack, there might be stress in the glass. Today is a lot of experimenting, figuring out. Notice we're creating similar pieces, but the setup is all different to each one. That way tomorrow we can figure out which technique is the best one to approach for the rest of the pieces we make. We are also going to be working with color later on, but today we don't want to put that into one of the variables that can change everything up. Once we're happy with the technique, we'll then go on with the color, and then we can build upon. Speaking of color, we are actually working on color with this vessel down here. So we've applied a thin layer of color, and Brandyn, our featured artist, has pushed that color layer nice and evenly around the bubble. It's very important that it goes on evenly. That way, when we begin to blow air, the piece is going to have a very similar density of color all the way around, and it won't be dense or too dense in one place than another. So we need to take our time when we're spreading that color evenly to ensure an even distribution of color. And again, this process, we won't really see the results of it until we see the final finished piece. Down in the center, we're working with a manipulated massive glass. Now, it doesn't matter what color we work with. When you get it hot, it will always turn red and orange. And that's what we're seeing here right now. Its true color will come back once the glass has cooled down properly, but for the rest of the demonstration, it would just look red and orange. Once we've gathered that hot layer, we use a couple different shaping tools. One of the major ones is a wooden block, however. This wooden block will ensure that our massive glass is going to blow out evenly all the way around, that the air will be distributed evenly when it comes to inflation. Now, these wooden blocks typically live in water their whole lives. They're made out of fruit wood, which is a very poor conductor, or fruit wood, which just lasts longer and holds more moisture than any other typical type of wood. So there's a longer lifespan of this wooden block. What does turning always do to the rod? Well, it keeps everything on center. If you stop turning, the glass will actually begin to sag to one area, and then it just ends up on the ground. So if you want it to look symmetrical, you have to keep turning the rod. We're using a lot of centrifugal force in order to keep our massive glass together. Down on the right-hand side, if you're wondering what's going on, the team on this right-hand side is creating the texture you see on all these pieces down here. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to apply this texture to our massive glass. So there's a lot of experimenting also down on the right as it is on the center. Now, the rods that we're using are made out of stainless steel, which is a very poor conductor of heat. If you notice where the glass makers are placing their hand, it's where the rod is still shiny. Towards the tip, there's discoloration. We call that the danger zone. We're typically not placing our hand in that area, rather it's directly behind that. Now we're bringing over a new blowpipe, a new rod, so we can continue the glass making demonstration. The reason that we did this move is to ensure that our glass piece can now have the proper colored pattern on the same spot. Now that we've transferred it to a different rod, we can continue the glass making demonstration and the glass blowing process can resume. So once again, the reason why we did this is because notice that there is a color fade. When we look at the piece down here in this pedestal, we'll notice it's black on the tip and light on the very bottom. The way that we had it right now was in reverse, that the very bottom would be black and this would be more of a clear. So to get a similar process this way, we had to transfer it to a different rod. So all you saw here was a setup to create a kind of similar color fade. Now, once again, my name is David. I'll be roaming around the hot shop. If you have any questions at any given point, please feel free to raise your hand or shout my name. Taking an additional layer of hot molten glass on the surface, this is just going to give us more glass to work with, so our piece in turn can become larger. We do let that core cool down prior to the gather, and we let it cool down because it gives us the ability to gather more glass, but just essentially maintain more control. Turning the rod is very important here in the hot shop floor. Just like last time, we're using a wooden block to ensure our massive glass will blow out properly. So this is the actual glass blowing part of glass. And if you're wondering how much air we blow, we're blowing about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle. So it's not a lot of air, but it does vary. If you listen very closely, you can hear the communication going on between the team. Sometimes we're asked to blow soft and gentle, and sometimes we're asked to blow quite hard. It really depends on how much we're trying to expand the bubble, but a great place to view and hear this communication going on is the top balcony. I do highly recommend it at one point or another. It's just a great view to see the action going on. And of course, you're more than welcome to take as many pictures and videos as you like. All we ask is you tag the Museum of Glass. To shape the mast, we're using a wet pad and newspaper. Now, that is the Wall Street Journal that we're burning here, but it can really be any old newspaper you may have. So if you have newspaper in your home and it's stacking up, well, we are more than happy to recycle that newspaper for you down here. It will be used in creating a wonderful piece of artwork. As long as the top layer is wet, we shouldn't leave any residue or markings left behind. We have another professional glassmaker now. There's a lot of talent down here, but we have Taylor, and notice that there is a hierarchy going on. Our gaffer, the person in charge, is sitting down in the center. Now, this is Brandyn Callahan. He's the person in charge, and he happens to be one of our visiting artists. But notice there is a hierarchy going on. Although Brandyn is calling all the shots, he lets know the pole turner. The pole turner in this case is Taylor. We met him a few minutes ago. And what Brandyn says is, hey, can you heat up the very tip portion? Make sure we see a little red and orange. So Taylor's job is to give the adequate heat necessary to continue to work on the mass of glass. We also have Bobby on the opposite end. Now notice he's standing by. He's ready to blow air at any time we are asked. And it's all due to the communication that might be going on. We also use wooden paddles, also made out of fruit wood, to just shield or, create a flat spot in the glass when necessary. Glass blowing is all about teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work here at the museum, and there's a few different routes you can take to become a glassmaker. There's approximately 50 colleges in the United States that teach glassmaking as an art form. That doesn't mean you'll become a professional, however, it just means you know how to work. Just like you go to class to learn how to paint or use ceramics, doesn't mean you're a professional, it just means you know how to. Now, there is factories around the United States that are still operation. There's very few, but that's one way you can develop your hand skills. It's also the best way to become a professional. But glass blowing is just like playing an instrument. It takes a lifetime to learn, and you're always constantly learning. If you have a great instructor, it can go a long way, but ultimately, it depends on you as an artist and how much time and effort you put into the medium. Down on the right-hand side, the team is doing something different. I do just want to hit upon it, just so we understand what's going on. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to achieve this texture you see on the surface, this kind of loopy effect. We're going to try to kind of bring that into the glass world, but there's not really one specific way how to, so we're just experimenting with different techniques. If you haven't had a chance to look up, I highly recommend it. I mean, this museum is just amazing. It's gorgeous and beautiful. In the 19th and 18th century, there would be studios that would be shaped in this similar cone-shaped design. It's a natural chimney where hot air can rise, and it just sucked away. However, this museum was really built on the early logging town that used to stand here. It's hard to believe, but Tacoma at one point was called the capital of the lumber industry. At its height in the 20s and 30s, we had over 70 lumber mills just in this area. Now, the lumber industry would burn excess wood in what was called the wigwam burner There's a handful of them located where we're at, the Foss Waterway. If you ever walk across Tacoma's waterfront, there's information boards around that waterfront, and you can learn a little bit more about the wigwam burners that stand here. Hard to believe, but if you're ever walking around Tacoma and find a bronze medallion on the ground with the Tacoma seal, that is a sign that a landmark, or most commonly, lumber mills and wigwam burners stood in that area. I am also still in search for one of those. I read this all on an information board on Tacoma's website, and I still haven't found one, but I'm really interested. So if you ever find one, please let me know. I'd definitely check it out also. So we had a question about the glass that we melt here at the museum. The glass that we melt here is a soda lime glass mixture. Now, the glass that we melt here is very specific. It's unlike any other glass. It is a soda lime glass mixture. So we do know the key components of this glass. It is silica sand, soda ash, and lime. Once we melt those three materials, it gives us the glass that we melt here at the museum. However, this glass is very unique. It's formulated to stay at a molten state for a longer period of time. It's produced about 45 minutes north of Seattle. So it's a local nugget that we're melting. However, it is top secret exactly what they're adding to extend the working time. They recently did sell the recipe, the formulation of this glass, for a pretty penny. I mean, it was quite an outstanding number. But the glass that we melt here is quite unique. Most of the glass in your home is made from similar soda lime glass. However, it's formulated for a different piece or a different product that they're producing. We've transferred our piece onto a different rod, so we brought over what we call the punty. It's a transfer rod. It's going to give us the ability to begin to work on the opposite end. Remember that this rod is only temporary, which means it will need to break later on in the process. Just not while we are working with it, of course. Even the pieces that we produce here today, we don't know if they're going to be a success until tomorrow once we open them up and see the expected work that we make. Yes, all the glass that we produce here today will cool down for the next several hours and days. The point of these is to mix both ceramic and glass together. Very similar. This is 3D printed glass, relatively new, and we can create pieces like this, wonderful pieces of artwork. This is a lampshade. It's actually one of the first lampshades with ceramic and glass I've ever seen in my life. And they're fused together, which is the most amazing thing. It wasn't added once the glass was cold. This was done while hot. That's what makes it really unique. And again, it's never really been done in the ever, just because they will typically crack or break. These pieces, the team has been doing relatively quite fast, around 30 minutes for each one. Probably this one's been the longest one, but that's because we added color. So if these are successful, will these be sold? Yes, but that is probably years out. You're seeing just a lot of experimenting with shape also. And that's probably something that can take the longest, is the R&D process, research and development. That's what we're doing here today. How many hours will it take to make one piece? Well, the 3D printer, depending on the design, can take up to an hour, but that's not including how long Phirak will take, our featured artist down here. He will take a long time using a Rhino to develop and create the code necessary. It's kind of countless hours, just because this is where the vessel essentially takes its character, and that can take however long it needs to take. The piece in the center is essentially complete here. The next step we will take is to slowly cool it for the next several hours. We have Bobby down here. He's a professional glassmaker, and he's suited up in a heat protective layer, and he's wearing Kevlar gloves, the same thing firemen and women use to combat fire in a high temperature situation. It's gonna keep his hands from burning when we hold this piece. We're gonna be placing it into the oven on your right-hand side with the green number 4. It's currently sitting at 920 degrees, and it'll be the home of this vessel, but also every vessel and everything we make here today. When you look through history, it was actually the annealing cycle that took the longest time for us to learn how to make, rather than melting glass. Melting glass was quite easy for us to do. It was preventing it from breaking that took the longest time. There is a mathematical formula that we can use to figure out how long that annealing cycle should be, but we essentially have to throw that outside of the window because clay will cool down at a different rate. So that's something that the glass makers need to take into account when creating these pieces. The one that we see here has already been put in the oven and brought back successfully. As for the ones that we're making here today, we won't really know if they're successful until tomorrow once we open the doors. If there's a crack, well, we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what's the best way to approach it and diagnose that problem. So the residency that you're seeing here today in front of you, the way that this museum works is we're now open 7 days a week. We have a professional crew that's here Wednesdays through Sundays. For Mondays and Tuesdays, however, we invite a visiting artist from our community, and today is a collab between Phirak and down here, Brandyn and Callahan. Now they're working on these pieces together. So every Monday and Tuesday for the next month, they will be down here. They also need to supply their own team. So if you notice, there's quite a large group here. They've been hired by our featured artists that we have here today. This group is from all across this place. Most of them probably reside around the Seattle area, however. If you didn't know, fascinating things, this piece is being put away, but our area, our Pacific Northwest that we have here, is the mecca of glass making. I have friends have moved from across the United States and the world just to end up here in Tacoma and Seattle and just to continue their glassmaking dreams. This is the place to move. This is the place to go to if you want to become a glassmaker. So per capita, there's more glass blowers in our area than there is anywhere else in the world. Just unique. I mean, there is so many studios. When I first started off here, I thought there was only the 3 studios that you see on Google in Tacoma. Then I find out that there's a bunch of privately owned studios just here, just in like people's garages and backyard that are small setup. Nothing really like how you see here, but in a miniature version, yes. And there's countless of those, again, in our area. Why will we need to put the piece back in the oven so many times? Well, what's going on is when we're working with the glass out here, it's cooling down. It's getting colder and colder. Eventually gets so rock hard we can no longer manipulate it. If we leave it out here too long also, it actually will break and crack. It's just gonna get too cold too fast. Due to the outside and the inside of the glass cooling down differently, that rate will actually break the outside of the glass. So we're constantly reheating it to prevent it from breaking, but also to continue to manipulate it. And then the last step is the annealing cycle. All glass through history always has to go through this cycle. And what's really going with the annealer is that the outside of the glass is going to even out the temperature difference and change, and it's going to allow the molecules to really set up. It's going to allow the molecules to be happy, and that way they're not going crazy, and it's going to eventually cause them to break or crack. So what we're doing down here is we're just slowly cooling the glass down. The molecules are really crazy at this point, and they're just going to cool down unevenly. What this is going to do is going to ensure that the whole mass of glass, that whole thickness, and even the ceramic, they're all cooling down at similar rate. It's going to even out the heat. It's heated right now at 920 degrees. It's on a computer cycle. For 6 hours, it will slowly make its way from 920 to 600 degrees. When it hits 600 degrees, it will cool down back to room temperature quite fast. The majority of the section is spent from 600 to 900. Yeah, any question? Anytime, anytime. Now, as this process continues down here, I do want to kind of clear up. Glass blowing has a very misleading name because we're not always blowing through the blowpipe. It just happens to be that the term glass blowing became really popular to describe this form of artwork. Now, a better name would be glass making because we're not always blowing through the blowpipe, but it just happens to be that's kind of the name that's stuck with this medium. This is the actual glass blowing part. So Bobby was down here and he was actually blowing through that blowpipe. We're blowing about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle. So it's not a lot of air, but it does vary. Sometimes we're asked to blow soft and gentle. On the other hand, we could also be asked to blow hard. It really depends on how much we are trying to expand our bubble. As we blow air, we're using a wet padded newspaper down here. Now, as long as that wet pad has a sufficient amount of water moisture, it shouldn't catch on fire. Now, if it's too wet and soggy, it can actually fall apart and leave more residues and crack that surface. But as long as it's just moist, we should be perfectly fine here. And the glass blowing can continue. Now, notice that it's all about teamwork. Glass blowing is all based off of teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work here in this hot shop floor. As we continue this live glass making demonstration, remember that all this glass that we're working with is coming out of one of our two furnaces. We are melting 1,000 pounds of glass in each furnace, and we have two of them. They're always turned on about 2,100 degrees, about the same temperature as molten lava. We then are entering these glory holes to continue to soften the glass and make our working time longer. As the glass stays outside, it's chilling, it's getting colder, and you can no longer manipulate to a certain point. So if we want to continue the glass making demonstration, we will have to reheat the glass to ensure that it won't break or crack. And we have a wonderful crew here at the museum. As we watch the live glass making, I'll be roaming around the hot shop. I try to hit on some of the basic and most important processes of this glass making demonstration. As you can tell, we've already entered our mold to apply that ceramic portion. We were discussing about how the ceramic and the glass won't cool down evenly. Even if it's a success here today, tomorrow as we open the door of the annealer and see the actual artwork and hold it, we won't really know if it was a success till tomorrow. And that's the kind of the big thing. We're seeing a lot of experimental work here, a lot of figuring out what's the best shape for these vessels, and really what's the best way to approach this idea, both mixing glass and ceramic together. All right, well, our audience with us now, this piece will now be cooling down for the next several hours, and just look how gorgeous it is. Unfortunately, if we leave it out here, it'll get too cold too fast, and it can break, crack, and even explode. To prevent it from breaking, we will slowly cool it down over the period of the next few hours. This will eliminate any stress that the glass may have. Now, to put this piece away, we have Bobby down here, and he's gonna suit up in a heat protective layer. He's a professional glass maker. He's gonna wear some Kevlar gloves here shortly, the same thing firemen and women use to combat fires in a high temperature environment. So we're gonna be using that to grab our ceramic piece and glass and bring it back to room temperature. Again, my name is David. If you have any questions about what you're seeing, please feel free to ask me. I'm gonna step off the mic here for a minute or two, but if you have any questions, please feel free to call out to me. So we do have a 3D printer going on down here. Now this was supported by our featured artist, one of two. Now these pieces are programmed both using Grasshopper and also Rhino. Now our featured artist here spent time creating the code necessary to make these and eventually be fired and then be brought here to this hot shop floor to be used. a quite unique day. We have a 3D printer going on down here. Now, this is owned and operated by one of our key featured artists here today, Phirak. Now, looks like Phirak is down here with the black T-shirt. Now, he's using a Rhino and Grasshopper to model these and then create the code to make them. Everything that you're seeing here is going to be used tomorrow. So once this is done printing, it's going to join our stack here. We're going to use all these molds here tomorrow. We're going to blow inside of them. We're going to blow glass inside of them, and then we're going to break all this ceramic off of it. These are only temporary, right? And then we'll be left with this kind of a mold shape. The other pieces you see here with texture have already been fired, so it's quite hard. We're blowing inside of them to make vessels and lampshades out of these. What you're seeing here is only research and development, design essentially. Ceramic and glass don't like to fuse to one another. They tend to break and crack. So what we're doing here is experimenting and figuring out what's the best way we can stop the glass from breaking. A lot of experimenting, trying out different forms, shapes, thickness, vessels themselves, seeing which one works the best. Yeah, so a lot of experimenting is what you're seeing here today. This is pretty much new. Thank you to Phirak down here, who's our visiting artist. He's a pioneer in this field. It's not really too many artists that are doing what he is doing here today. And he's been kind of dabbling in this kind of art for the past 8 years when he was first introduced to glass. And Phirak was actually one of the first people to teach a class on both 3D printing and glass being put together at Pilchuck Glass School, one of the first ones ever. So it's a really unique area we are in right now, especially because you never know that this might, once we figure it out, you might be used to create bigger and larger scale pieces. So we have two different pieces going on. In the center, we're going to be picking up the actual ceramic portion. Now, these are being pulled out of this table one by one and being placed into the garage, a temporary place where we can store glass and keep it warm, but it's also a good place where we can heat up the ceramic, ensure that it's not going to crack when it meets the glass. Now, on the right-hand side, we're working on a different project, but the similar series, we're trying to achieve this effect that you see on all of them, this loopiness effect. We want to make that into our glass, and so we are figuring out different techniques, different ways we can approach that and add it to our glass mass. As we continue down here, do we have any questions from our audience? Again, all the hot molten glass is being pulled out of our furnace. We have two of them here at the Museum of Glass where all the hot glass is kept. When I open this door, it just looks red and orange on the inside, but there's a lot more going on. Behind that door lies a crucible. Ceramic pot of glass is being heated up at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the glass exits this furnace, it immediately begins to cool down. So we then enter what we call a glory hole, which is the reheating chamber, a round barrel on its side, lined with fire brick made to insulate and keep the heat inside. It's slightly hotter than the furnace at 2300 degrees, but you'll notice the glass makers will manipulate the glass and then re-enter the chamber for continuing melting and also to continue manipulating the massive glass. On our top screen, we are going to go through a couple slides of the equipment that we have here just to simplify and understand what's going on here. The piece on the right-hand side is entered the annealing oven. It'll cool down for the next several hours to ensure it doesn't break or crack. Now, one of the glass makers has gathered glass in the funnel. Now, this is Taylor, and he's going to be making what we call the transfer rod. It's going to be the new handle on which we can begin to work on the opposite end. So it's only temporary, which means it needs to be strong enough to hold our piece together. Oh, no. We added a few droplets of water, and it caused the glass to break. So with a slight tap, we can begin to work on the opposite side of our vessel. But since we created a break-off zone, which is a constriction, we also thicken the glass in that area. So one of the first steps we will take is to thin out the glass, just to ensure we have an even thickness all the way around. The move that you're seeing precisely right now is called the recentering, finding center on the vessel. This way, when it's turning, it's not wobbling on that rod, rather it's turning on the same plane, and it's just going to make for a more aesthetically pleasing final piece. If we don't, you'll notice at the very end will be a little bit lopsided. It'll be off to the side on a little bit. Typically, it can be fixed by centering the piece itself. So down on that right side, just to kind of touch on what we're making, we're producing the texture you see on these surfaces. So notice kind of this looping effect that's on some of them. We want to replicate that in glass, especially that one. Notice that kind of loop effect. We want to replicate that in glass. And so to do that, we're experimenting different techniques. And so that's one of the techniques that we're working with to create this looping effect. Now, if you haven't had a chance to check out the rest of the museum will be closing in approximately 25 minutes. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the rest of the museum, I highly recommend you do that now. However, we will continue blowing glass until 5 o'clock, but giving a heads up to all our wonderful viewers, we will be closing shortly. Now that this vessel is complete, the next step is to slowly cool it down for the next few hours. It'll sit in the annealer, the oven with the green number 4 on your right-hand side of the hot shop floor. It is currently sitting at 920 degrees, and it'll be the home of this vessel and everything we produce for the rest of the day. Unfortunately, if we leave any glass out here, it'll get too cold too fast. It can break, crack, and even explode. To prevent it from breaking, we will have to slowly cool it down. Now, Bobby down here, a professional glass maker, has suited up in a heat protective layer, and he's wearing some Kevlar gloves. It's the same thing that firemen and women use to protect themselves from a high temperature situation. We're going to use those to grab the glass itself and then slowly cool it down. Thank you. These are mine. These are yours? Yeah. You left them on the pedestal, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I use them to trimming. I decided I should make all these cups to trim them using my shears. Yeah. It is different though than the ones that we're using here. You get the nice curvedness easier. Yeah. It's better for like that size. It's perfect. It cuts like butter. And just like that, we complete this vessel here today. Isn't that amazing? We've been filling up this annealer. I do want to let everyone know, again, we're going to be closing within 20 minutes. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen the rest of the museum, our kids design glass, and even the bathrooms, because when it comes about 5 o'clock, we'll shut everything down. If you haven't had a chance, I also recommend this top balcony. It's a fantastic place to view the live glass making demonstration. So I do want to give everyone a heads up that we have completed the glass making demonstration in the center. We are just going to set up now. These vessels that you see here that we're printing right now, we're going to be using tomorrow. We're going to be blowing inside of them and then removing all of this. It's just a temporary mold. The only action in glass blowing we will see is on the right-hand side of this hot shop floor. With that said, on our top screen, we're going to show you an airplane video, a unique process we saw here at the Museum of Glass. Other than that, we are just going to see the live glass making on that right-hand side. Again, my name is David. We want to thank you for joining us, but we are going to be wrapping this up with the action you see on the right-hand side and a few videos on our top screen.